Breaking the patterns. It's such an exciting workshop. It's just a 4-hour workshop, but it goes straight into the patterns that are running your life, like a computer program or a virus in a computer. So those patterns are running in the background of your life, and they're making you do certain things in a certain way. And that workshop, Breaking the Patterns, even though it's just a 4-hour workshop, it is one of those workshops that, because you bring awareness into what your patterns are, how they're playing out in your life, and what it actually means to have that pattern. It's nobody leaves that workshop without having a breakthrough in their everyday life and their everyday repeating situations. So it's a very practical workshop. It's not just theory, it's an actual interactive practical workshop.
Yeah. So how do you recognize, how do people recognize their patterns?
Basically, it's the basis of it is that we look at what keeps happening in your life time and time again.
And then, so what's some of the steps to help break those patterns?
You need to come to the workshop. The main thing is about, first of all, to become aware of what is happening in your life, what your behavior is like, how your behavior, when you're being triggered by these patterns of thought, how your behavior affects what comes to you. So that's kind of the first step. You look at what is actually manifesting in your life right now, because your thought patterns and your behavior patterns bring around the manifestations that are happening in your life. And then once you're aware of those things, we look at what they actually mean, what those manifestations actually mean to yourself. So what is the thought pattern behind what keeps reoccurring? And then when we know what the thought pattern behind what keeps reoccurring is, we can transform that thought pattern into something that's super productive. So it becomes almost like your superpower. It's really exciting because, for example, I'll give you an example. This might, help you get an idea of what I'm talking about. For example, I'm very familiar with the passive-aggressive patterns in relationships. And why is that? Because I've been like them. So I was for years really passive-aggressive in my personal relationships. When I became aware of that, first of all, I was just like terrified. Like, I was just disgusted, to be honest, about how I had been treating people. And when I realized that that pattern was actually giving me something, giving me a sense of something, and I could start giving that sense of something, whatever it was that I needed, and in that case it was I needed acknowledgement and validation and appreciation. When I started to give that to myself, the pattern broke. And when the pattern breaks, the next step of it is to turn it into something that's really like a superpower, as I was saying before. So you take that pattern and start embracing it and looking at the positive sides of that.
So you're not trying to squash or push those feelings, deny your feelings, are you?
It's actually taking what's there. Because these skills, these patterns have become ingrained skills in ourselves. What that means is that we are, depending on what the pattern is, we are extremely skilled at doing that specific thing. And for me and for many passive-aggressive people, it's manipulating people. Now, the reason why I'm so good at delivering results for women in these programs that I'm running is because I manipulate them to relax in that space and allow themselves to transform. So I've taken something that was completely negative, which is manipulating people to get what I wanted. I've taken it and turned it to manipulating people to get them what they want. So that's become like a superpower.
Yeah. So would you say you would, are there other personality types that are perfectly suited to this course, or is it, you know, do you target individually, or is it sort of all encompassing?
Well, because everybody is different, even people who are like similar personality types, the people are different. So everybody is unique. That's the starting premise. And whatever that person is bringing into that workshop on the day is completely relevant to their next steps. So everybody, the starting premise is always that I don't make any assumptions about anybody's personality about when they're coming into the program. However, because I have been studying different personality types for a good guts of 6 years, and I've been working with people on the ground with these different personality types and different patterns, I'm able to identify kind of rough categories and kind of subcategories for people, depending on their behavior patterns in what works for them and what doesn't. So I have learned to manipulate different personality types of people very skillfully. And all of this patterning, these patterns that are running our lives, they're all hangovers from our childhood and our imprint period from our childhood, when we learned to either value or devalue ourselves in comparison to other people or what we're doing. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Just think, you know, how much weight do you put on what has happened in someone's childhood, and how they do things, you know, consciously or subconsciously, you know, in relation to all the patterns. Or bad patterns, good, you know.
Well, the thing is that there isn't actually good or bad patterns. There's just patterns that are useful for your life, and then patterns that are not. So taking the judgment away from any patterns is actually immediately helping the situation. But as I was saying there before about the imprint period in our childhood, between 3 and 7 years old, we have this imprint period which determines our personality type and our programming. So how we deal with things or how we react to things. So, for example, if you never do any self-development work or personal development work, your imprint patterns are running your life completely. But the more and more and more of this kind of self-development work that you do, the less your patterns are running your life, and the more they have been transformed into something else.
So yeah, so what you're saying, the imprint from those yes, you get up, you make your bed, you have your breakfast, you know, have everything tidy, and you know, and do that at all costs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might,
girl or boy,
that's right.
And,
that's right.
You know, do what you're told, and
yep.
And everything's honky-dory.
Yeah.
Might not be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or when does that come unstuck for most people? I guess it's different. People realizing that they're in a rut, that they're just doing what they've been told to do. They're not actually aware of why they're doing things. They just have to live up to this expectation. I get, you know, people would realize this at different stages.
Absolutely. And it's usually only when something dramatic happens that we start questioning what we're doing. And often one of our parents' deaths is the biggest trigger in finding out what our patterns are, because we have a sense of loss of the source of that pattern.
How much play would come in with, okay, that parent has gone, and then having a sense of freedom to be, not have to make your bed every day, not have to live up to whatever expectation.
There's usually a lot of freedom once the grieving process has been gone through. I mean, if you have a poor relationship with your parent and they die, there's an immediate, or even if there's a sense of having been hard done by these people, or even abuse, there's often the initial relief of knowing that that will never happen again. But of course, that's completely different from making your bed.
Yes.
So that patterning began when you accept the death or the passing of that person. Often what happens is that you start unraveling, you start questioning the things, because you start to feel free of anything that you accepted as being the truth, and you start exploring other things and often find something that is more suitable for you personally. And the reason why I'm saying often, not always, is because everybody grieves differently. Everybody grieves differently. There aren't two people on this planet who grieve the same.
No, that's right.
And you can't make any assumptions about anybody's grieving.
No, because some people are quite openly emotional, and then others are very closed.
And because we've all had different childhood experience, we will get triggered differently when our parents die. For me, personally, it's not the death, it's I hope that they don't suffer before they die. My father died almost 7 years ago, and he had leukemia for 6.5 years before he passed, and that was very unfortunate. I mean, he wasn't really a pleasant person, and there was a lot of kind of difficulty with him, but you wouldn't wish anybody to be sick for that long or at all before they pass. So for me, the passing isn't the worst thing that can happen. For me, what's worst that can happen is that somebody suffers for a long period of time before they pass. Because life goes on, and the more you are around death, for example, nurses, doctors, morticians, you realize that it's just another day. Life goes on. And that may sound callous, but it's just how life works. There's a cycle to it, and we all have a date of expiry. Yeah. But that's often when most of the kind of the patterns are being triggered into becoming alive, and often it lasts for 3 to 6 months easily. So if you're in a relationship and your spouse's parent dies, and especially if there's been problems with that, you can expect at least 6 months of really difficult time in your relationship, because all the triggers are being brought forth. All the triggers that may not have been dealt with.
That's right. And then there's, going on from that, just normal life, even not necessarily after a moment of grief or big event like that. There can be, hubby goes away, comes back, and the relationship between the husband and wife, and the toing and froing there, and him not putting the toilet seat down, and those sort
all
of
that
things,
important stuff.
The things that, all those little triggers, those niggling things, and sometimes times of stress, say, changing jobs, changing location, all those kind of
moving.
triggers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all. That's when we usually find what our patterns are throughout those hard times. Breakups, moves, somebody dying, kids being born, big occasions like that.
Yeah.
So, but you don't have to wait until you're being triggered by something. If you're already aware, and this workshop is really for people who have already done certain amount of work, so that they are aware of their patterns, they are aware of something that keeps repeating itself. So when you're doing this workshop, you can just focus on one area, and what we'll basically be doing is taking that area. There's limited seats in it because I want to be able it to be as interactive as possible. However, you take this area of importance that you have noticed that there's a pattern in, and we examine that one specific thing. So we'll give you the tools to actually look at it, realize what it is, and then transform it into something else. And once you've done it once, if you do it again in a short period of time after the workshop, you've done it twice, then you can actually start to do it every time you notice that there's a pattern.
So then how, being given these tools to help cope or change the way you're looking at your patterns, I'm guessing it's going to be harder for some people to break those patterns than others.
It's actually not, because when we do the Breaking the Patterns workshop, a big part of it is to realizing your values, your top values. And once you start living by your top values, it's actually not hard at all. It just transforms the whole situation around.
So then, am I right in, working out the value in yourself is a big part of
Well,
this?
we'll be doing that on the course, so yeah. So you'll actually get help in figuring out what your top values are, and they are actually reflected by your patterns as well. So whatever keeps reoccurring, we can pretty much determine what your top values are from that. Once your top values are met, it's honoring towards you, and you can actually live as a free individual when you can live a life that is honoring to who you really are.
Yeah. That's it. Most people would strive for that or hope.
Yeah, we're not given these tools. This conversation should be had in schools. This should be a conversation that every child should have when they're growing up, to really embrace what their natural values are and keep finding out more and more about who they really are and what their values are, and then embracing that, and then bringing the child forth with an actual set of tools to live a happy life.